So the last couple times I've preached, it's not been every Sunday, but I've been kind of picking on the minor characters in the big stories of the Bible. As I've been reading the Bible and reading stories, trying to come up with things to talk about, I've been seeing these little characters pop up and their involvement in what they mean to the big story. And today's no different. I want to talk about the story of Naaman when he was healed of leprosy. 2 Kings 5:1. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So Naaman had a lot going for him. If you look at the history where he lived in Damascus. It was the place to live. It was Beverly Hills of, whatever AD or BC at that point. The city, I should know that. It's Old Testament. Come on. I'll wake up. Don't worry. The city was full of wealth. And so our buddy Naaman was also wealthy. Not only did he live in this wealthy city, he was the commander of the king's army. He had a very important position. He had everything you could want, except he had one little problem. He had leprosy. Today that wouldn't be a big deal, but back then it was a big deal. There was no cure. If there was a cure, a rich and powerful guy like Naaman could gather up his money and go to the biggest, baddest doctor and pay whatever it cost, and he could be cured. But there was no cure. So here sits Naaman, rich and powerful and sick and hopeless, really, because there's no cure for this disease that he has. It's eventually going to get him. Verse 2, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. So our second character in today's story doesn't even get a name. We know that she was captured by raiders, and they were probably soldiers that were under Naaman's command. If he was the commander of the army and they're sending out raiding parties, he probably had something to do with this girl being captured and brought back. I read some commentaries that said Naaman and his wife must have treated this girl pretty well, or she wouldn't have been inclined to help out. She wouldn't have been inclined to speak up and say something. That might be true, but I don't think it has to be. I don't see anything there other than just they're basing their commentary on normal human behavior, normal human inclination. If somebody's nice to you, you're nice back. But I don't see that in the Bible. So if somebody else knows where it is, let me know. They might have treated her well. Maybe they didn't. Suppose they didn't treat her well. Suppose they were rough on her. What would she gain if Naaman continued to suffer? What would she gain if ultimately Naaman died from his leprosy? What would she lose if Naaman got better? What did she have that she would lose if Naaman was to be healed? Remember and think about that. So here's our young girl, humble, homesick, nothing to lose. Verse 4, Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go, the king of Aram replied. So his master's the king. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. The young girl told Naaman to go to the prophet, but in his pride and arrogance, he decided that anyone who could heal leprosy must work for the king, because that's how it would be, right? So he and the king handled this situation the way that powerful people handle things. They loaded up about $1 million. I checked it out. It was about $1 million worth of silver and gold and Louis Vuitton, and they sent Naaman to Israel's king. Verse 7, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me? Israel's unnamed king doesn't know what to make of this letter. All he knows is the king of Aram and Naaman's buddies and Naaman's soldiers have been putting the hurts on his people. So he freaks out thinking that any kind of a letter, any kind of a message from Aram must mean war in some way. Verse 8, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Elisha was the prophet that our young girl was talking about to begin with. When Elisha says, "Send the man to me so that he will know that there is a prophet in Israel," what he was really saying, more than that, was, "Send the man to me so that he will know there is a God in Israel." Or more importantly, "Send the man to me so that he will know there is a God, a real God." The Aramites had their own gods. They had their own worship. They had their own sacrifices and all this stuff. So he said, "Send him to me. Let him see that there's a real God in Israel. Let him see there's a real prophet in Israel." So Naaman, verse 9, went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." So this big, powerful guy with his big, powerful entourage and all his money and all the fancy clothes and everything else, he expected, if I'm going to come like this with a letter straight from the king, surely I'll have an audience with the king. The king will do something about this. But Elisha was going to give him a lesson in humility. Not only wasn't the king going to do anything about Naaman's situation, Elisha wasn't even going to come out of the house to say hi. He was going to send a messenger out. Worse than that, the cure wasn't anything majestic and big and powerful either. It wasn't even unusual. It was simple. Go wash 7 times in the muddy old Jordan River. Verse 11, but Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Now there's like 19 sermons so far. Just stick with me. I'm not going to get into all these things. Verse 13, Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow down there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. This story is absolutely nuts, how many layers it has. We get the surface level, right? A very proud, prideful guy had to humble himself in order to be healed. That's a picture of every sinner ever, right? We've got to humble ourselves in order to be healed. And that's the biggest layer is when we zoom out of this whole thing and look at it. It's basically the entire message of the gospel in a story. There's a messenger that brings the good news: humble yourself and be healed. But I want to go into one of the characters in this story because I think at times we can relate. I want to talk about the young girl. She had been taken from her family. She's under the thumb of Naaman and his wife. Like I said, whether they were good to her or not doesn't really make any difference to me, because they had her as a servant, and it wasn't because she answered an ad in Craigslist like servant wanted. No, she had been kidnapped by a band of raiders. She was not there because she wanted to be, and there was nothing she could do about it. The little girl clearly recognized that Naaman had all the power, but she also recognized that he had leprosy. When we look at the world and all it has to offer, it's easy to be jealous. It's easy to want what the world offers. Or it's easy to be angry, to hate what sin does to us, to hate what sin does to other people, to our loved ones, what it does to the people that can't defend themselves. It's hard to have compassion, to look past all the stuff and all the evil and see the world does have everything, but it has one little problem that it can't cure. For Naaman, it was leprosy. For the world, it is sin. In both cases, God is the only cure. This little girl, young girl, I don't know if she was little, she might have been huge, said she was young though. She could have been jealous of Naaman's power. She could have been jealous of his wealth and all the command that he had. Or, I think more likely, she could have been really bitter and angry because of the bad things that Naaman and his band of raiders had done to her, all the bad stuff that happened to her. But look at her response. What did she stand to gain if Naaman suffered? What would she gain if that leprosy killed him? What would she lose if he got better? She recognized what ailed Naaman in spite of the circumstances, and she showed compassion on him. We saw in the story, Naaman blundered through his trip to Elisha. He didn't go to Elisha. He went to the king. He took a whole bunch of money with him. He tried to pay for it, and Elisha said, you can't pay for it. And then he says, okay, well, give me some dirt so I can go back home and build an altar, even though Elisha knows that none of this is how anything works, But Elisha was really gracious and merciful on him. And then he even says, oh, by the way, when I do go back, I am going to have to go in and bow down to that Brenneman every now and then. Is that going to be okay? I hope that'll be fine. He blundered through the whole thing. Not like a great student. He didn't get it at that point. But he got healed. What about our young girl, though? We don't know what happened to her. Not another word is mentioned about the young girl. Maybe Naaman went back and he was so grateful and so thankful for what she told him that he gave her a whole bunch of money and sent her back to her family and made her a really important person and put it out in the newspapers. There's a God in Israel, and this young girl was the one that told me all about it. Maybe. Maybe he went back and said, hey, thanks, I feel a lot better, and carried on his business. Or maybe he went back and said, make me a sandwich. You're never going to believe I came up with this great idea to go and see this prophet Elisha, and he healed me. You guys should really check him out. Do any of those sound familiar? Have you ever helped someone and they did make a big deal about it and they told you, thank you, and what can I do? I'll never be able to repay you. Or maybe you helped someone and they came back and they said, hey, thanks, and then just went on their way. Or have you ever helped someone and they came back and it was like it was their idea all along? They completely forgot that you had anything to do with it? We don't know. We don't know what happened. It could have been any of these things. She knew that God could heal Naaman, but there was no guarantee for her. The only thing I can gather from it is that she showed compassion because she didn't want to see anyone suffer, not even the one who held her captive away from her family. If you're a Christian, you know what's wrong with the world. You know what ails the world. You know what's wrong with the jerk at work. You know what's wrong with the nutcases in Washington. You know because it's the same thing that was wrong with you before you met God. Sin. No matter what anyone has going for them, there's always one thing that they can't fix by themselves. They can't save themselves from sin. If you're a Christian, you know the secret to curing a sin problem. You know it's simple. You know it's free. You know that it can't be bought or sold. You know that sharing it won't mean any less of the cure for you. You've got nothing to gain and nothing to lose. You know it, and you know they need it, but what will you do about it? Would you share the cure with a guy who would take you from your family and make you his servant? Would you share if you didn't know whether you would get thanked or paid or set free or recognized, some kind of a kudo? I stand up here most Sundays and I talk to whoever will listen about God. I try to share my faith with the people I'm around through the week. But would I still do it if you guys kidnapped me and wouldn't let me go see my family. Would I still get up here every Sunday if everyone here was a jerk to me? Or would I sit in silence and wait for the day when you get what's coming to you? It's relatively easy to share and relatively easy to want salvation for people that are kind and appreciative and tell you you did a good job every week, even on weeks that you didn't. But it wouldn't be so easy if things were different. There isn't a great chance that any of us will get kidnapped by a band of raiders this week. However, there is a very great chance that we will see the ugliness that sin produces in the world. We'll see the ugliness that sin produces in individual hearts. And it's not going to feel good when we're the target of that. My challenge for us then is when we feel hurt or frustrated or angry, to remember the root of the bad behaviors that hurt us. It's sin. Then I want us to remember what the cure for sin is. We might have nothing to gain and nothing to lose by sharing the cure. But we should do it anyway, because for the one that is cured, he will gain everything. Let's pray. God, there's a lot in the world that we don't understand. There's a lot that's hard for us to take. God, we like those verses like, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord," especially when someone hurts us, especially when someone's a jerk. And more than a jerk, especially when someone's just nasty and evil and wicked. God, we want your vengeance on those people when we're just thinking in our own strength and our own minds. We wish you'd take them out. But God, you didn't take us out. We were wicked and we were nasty. You gave us grace. You gave us mercy. You gave us your Son to die for our sins and make a way. And God, just like you bore with us in our sin, in our nastiness, I ask that you help us to remember what's wrong with the world. Help us to remember what the cure for that wrong is. And help us to share, even if we've got nothing to gain or nothing to lose. I ask all this in your name. Amen.